go. Pop in there, Cap.
Thanks, Terry. What was your name?
Steven.
Okay,
Hi.
I'm Carrie.
Hey, Carrie.
Nice to meet you.
I just had one little update, so I just.
Yeah, do your thing.
That was. Oh, I'm good. Thanks so much for coordinating. Anything I should know, locales or anything, Mike? Or some of
I
that?
tested the mics are on.
Okay.
Yeah, there's, hi there.
Hi.
He's a co-presenter.
Hey there, I'm Carrie.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice for me.
Keep you guys, I don't know, give it a stop and start,
Okay.
basically.
Yeah. What is the timing again?
So it's meant to start at 9, but I know everyone's coming down from upstairs,
Yeah.
so we'll give it a few. And then this one goes till 10:15.
Okay.
There's no clock in here, but I'll have like a 5-minute high time.
Okay.
I'm gonna sit in the back.
That's just for. Just turn it off.
That's right.
It doesn't.
It's just
Ample.
for us. You and monitor. It's not a.
You get three things.
It's not a live stream.
Is Michael turning?
The one
Is
upstairs
that live?
is 1250.
So if we're
That one's still going live.
up here,
Yeah,
just do this.
you got it.
Cool. And then maybe just advance on the computer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. And the tech guys are doing the live stream. We don't need to think about that.
Nice.
Cool. I'm glad I asked for this session as moderating, so we'll do all the got this work for
Oh, cool.
So basically I just logistically move things around. So
Yeah, that's the life.
Yeah, right. It's like all tripods to work.
Gotta work the camera.
Everybody's advances. It's funny, I rushed. I know down.
too. I was like,
It's like, wait, I can see you.
Fine.
yeah.
Oh, no, these, no, ours, coffee.
You know, I was thinking,
Yeah.
should take our time at the beginning, kind of just introducing ourselves and and how this like narrative for a little while casually with like how the idea started. Like this your background coming in from NABC, experience with Puget Sound Food Hub started through NABC up north, and then basically how that was pretty high. That seemed to be a pretty high priority to extend, trying to create that regional network.
Yeah.
And so another node to the south had been talked about. That haven't really created space, so we should just tell those stories up front and just be
Yeah.
in storytelling mode. I think that'd be a nice soft way to start.
I think that's brilliant.
That would be.
And yeah, I don't know if I ever said it out loud, but it basically, like, I mean, David, being a man of few words, got me on the phone one day, and he's like,
Start
I want you to start Food Hub down there.
Yeah, and Naslin and I had gone up and already had conversations too about like there should be this like linked network,
Yeah.
and somehow that would be a nice way to start to build that regional
Yeah.
capacity for like specialization and production and
Yeah, and
collaboration.
yeah, someday over in Otwala, and it probably won't be for 2 years because it's just too tender right now, but if I can ever get my hands back on the tiller of the RFSP, like, that's why it's there.
Right.
So,
It's getting there. You're trying your ass off.
thank you.
So I'm
Thank
trying
you.
my ass off to
Thank you.
keep, yeah. I was like not going to touch that project selection subcommittee with the 10-foot poles. Like governance sounds like a good spot to be in. We had a good little team
Oh, good.
with Andrew and
Yeah.
Dave Green.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I learned a lot just in a couple of short meetings from those two.
Yeah.
It's like, I wouldn't say it put me in my place, but I was reminded quickly by that level of experience. And
Yeah.
I have opinions, but I'll volunteer them, but I'm doing a lot of listening.
Yeah. Yeah, those guys are great. I keep making the assumption that you're talking about Andrew Stout, right?
I know. Well, I'm actually a little confused on who that is because I thought it might be, but I couldn't quite tell. I think it's Andrew Stout.
Andrew Stout, usually short blonde hair, looks a little disheveled right now.
He was
Runs
calling in, so I
Full
couldn't
Circle
tell.
Farm.
Yeah.
It sounds like it.
Yeah, I
'cause
think that's-
Andrew's he doesn't mince words. He's very generous, really, really neat guy.
Mm-hmm.
But I could see him, and I don't know that he's met David Green, but those two are maybe kind of like peas in a pod.
Yeah, no, they were definitely.
Yeah.
It wasn't a long dialogue, but there was some good little banter
And I
between
think
the two of them.
Evan just clued me in that I think Andrew went up, and didn't Andrew Stout help with the installation of the?
That's his like new fun thing he does these days. Is like install coolers. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to give it a few,
Okay.
obviously, so you have people in the room, but
Yeah.
how far cuts into like the time to do what you need to do?
What time is it now?
7 after?
I mean, we have, another few for sure. We should give it another 3 at least, and then see if we need to give it another 2. Yeah, 10 after, 12 after.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the live stream here.
Yeah. Thanks for your help setting everything up.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
They just said that Melissa is tracking it for the announcement, so.
Oh, yeah.
hopefully that'll-
We'll be fine for
Okay,
time. Yeah.
cool.
We don't need to plow through a minimum number of slides.
Yeah, I've learned a lot working with Poppy Davis.
Mm-hmm.
And as with most brilliant teachers, some things that I intend to do and others that I intend never to do. But she is great to work with, I
Mhm.
tell you what, man. Like, effective use of time, straight up, candid honesty.
Mm-hmm.
I like working with
Yeah,
her.
she kind of keeps her emotions on her sleeve, during the meetings, and doesn't mind showing a little rawness,
Yeah,
a little exasperation. Like, let's keep this going.
yeah.
And I think that's kind of in an appropriate way.
Yeah.
I think I've heard. So anyway.
I don't, if I had it to do over again, it's not likely that I would look outside of the Northwest for a facilitator. I think that the lived experience within our agricultural ecosystem,
Where is she? Is she local or is she
Berkeley.
outside? Okay.
and I'm sure, I mean, you can see it, you can see why Jeff chose her. And I may have done the same thing. I don't know how to honestly assess that. But I do think as we get a little further along, I think somebody that understands the backdrop of our Western Washington agricultural economy.
Right. Where's the third mic?
Ooh.
Look alive.
Right. We'll just switch name tags. Hi. Good, good.
Just telling everyone, since the welcome ran over, we have like a 30-minute break after first session, so you guys can feel free to run over,
Just a little.
or like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So the session will be the same time frame, the break will be short.
Okay. Cool.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Terry, thanks for all the help getting everything
Oh, of
set up.
course.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Thanks. Didn't actually catch her name there until the end. That's our liaison. Yeah. Yeah, I like the starting with the story. That'll be a nice way to keep it fun at the beginning. And these are always good when they come across a little more conversational.
I agree.
We will have plenty to talk about, but we'll see. We might just get stopped at a couple of key points in conversation, which could be good. I'm curious kind of what experience our audience will have with collective marketing. Maybe we should ask that. I mean, does anybody someone do it for that? Anybody, right? Like to kind of know who's out there.
I'm always curious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll probably ask that. 'Cause sometimes I come in thinking people are sometimes more than just the first year or two in. Sometimes they're not.
Yeah, I made a habit of asking basically like acreage. 5 and under?
Yeah.
5 to 10? 10 and over? Because it really does shape it, content to
Yeah.
a degree.
One more minute. We'll go to the 9:12. It's 9:11. So I guess we'll be having these off. Is it okay while we're presenting that we're? Okay. Carrie, how should we get started? Do you want to? Yeah, sounds good.
Let you know that you're in lessons learned for establishing a producer-owned food cooperative in Southwest Washington. We have Stephen Bramwell with Washington State University and Mike Macaroni with the Northwest Agricultural Business Center. Excited to hear you guys. I definitely want to be on this session. You all should have got one of these from me. I'll grab it at the end. Yeah, we get started.
Excellent. Thanks, Carrie. Good morning, everybody. We probably want to have some of the mic because it's for recording purposes, right? I'll just kind of hold it a little bit away, though. Yeah, nice morning out there. Thanks for coming in. I'm sure a lot of you could be doing things, moving animals from one paddock to another this morning or whatever you do, moving boxes around if you're Andrew. My name's Stephen Bramwell. This is Mike Peroni, as you've been introduced. We're going to start off just by giving a little backstory to the Food Hub development process that we've been both involved in. I, as Carrie mentioned, work for Washington State University out of Thurston County, and I've started there in 2016 as the extension agent, working with farmers. For a period of time before that, worked teaching classes in Hort and environmental science, and then taught at the Evergreen State College for a number of years, teaching on-farm, kind of practice organic ag type stuff. Farmed for a couple years out of college, and have always had my heart, in the field and growing food. So it's really great to be able to continue doing that work and helping people out to build their businesses. And then I've got a little plot of land that our family grows a garden on, has chickens. So yeah, the bug is there for sure. Mike, you want to introduce yourself a little more?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, my distinguished colleague from WSU, Stephen Bramwell. My name is Mike Peroni. I am Assistant Director of the Northwest Agriculture Business Center. Have been involved in Western Washington organic agricultural production most of my adult life. In my current role with NABC, we offer business technical services to agricultural enterprise in a nutshell. And I took the position in 2019. NABC was one of the architects of the Puget Sound Food Hub, and the executive director, in short, said there's a lot of interest and some real traction in developing aggregation, distribution, and marketing services in Southwest Washington. I want you to get involved with that. And so Stephen Bramwell, Aslan Mead from the Thurston Economic Development Council, I'm sure his name will come up today, had laid some of the groundwork, and leveraging my experience in agricultural production along with the resources through NABC, we launched, and I'll try hard not to rattle on, though Stephen Aslan and I have worked now for about 2 years on this project, so it's all details to me. But we started with a grant which was geared toward a year of research. Spoiler alert, COVID-19 hit, and we quickly pivoted to implementation. And so a majority of today's presentation is real-world experience that we had from quickly pivoting from a research grant to implementation, lessons learned, and also quite a bit of learned experience as well as financial data that we collected over the last year.
Nice, thanks, Mike. I did fail to mention that the first time I met Mike, it was in 2006, and at this conference, and Mike had longer hair and darker at that time than he does now, and he was a wild-eyed farmer on a mission to talk about, like blowing up the local food system in a good way, and it was a very good meeting. So anyway, Mike's right. We started this project with let me back up. So we're going to tell the story in terms of how this got established. When I first started working for Extension, I did a needs assessment, and I'll jump to this. Chatted with farmers, and one of the primary needs that was identified, I'm getting used to the mic here, was market access. A lot of folks were having a hard time finding markets to sell into. Does that work? Work. Kind of on and off. It's okay, great. And so it became apparent that looking at a few different ways to help people augment their access to sales was going to be a good place to sink in some time and energy. As Mike's mentioned, our partner Aslan Mead at Thurston EDC got involved in this work as a regional ag kind of networking individual. We started getting really interested in aggregated sales, and took a trip up to Skagit County, visited the Puget Sound Food Hub, were shown around by David Bauermeister, director of NABC, and started hatching this idea that establishing a food hub south would be sort of a good idea. Had this concept that potentially one day there may even be some box trucks relaying product that the other region doesn't, have, or in some way is compatible, complementary, kind of passing in the night, to link together food buyers and food producers kind of up and down kind of I-5 corridor, and building out this concept of a producer-owned distribution network. So I'll let Mike tell a little more of that story, because then he kind of joins the picture at that point.
Yeah, and my introduction to Southwest Washington, our food hub is located currently and operating out of a Tumwater warehouse, was through a group of commodities growers that had lost their market. They were selling into a processing market. National Frozen Foods in Chehalis stopped issuing contracts in 2018. Another processing facility in that area went bankrupt in 2008, and that group had identified malting barley as an alternative crop moving forward. So with my work with them, we landed at the formation of a cooperative, and those individuals were very clear that moving forward they wanted to increase the membership. It was for farmers, not just grain farmers, but for any farmers. And so what NABC was able to contribute meaningfully to the project initially was the development of that organizational structure, that cooperative where the food hub endeavor could land with an established legal entity to move forward.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to back up one and just mention these quotes. These are a bit of the sentiment at the beginning of the project. Some of the things I was hearing as we were talking with our local community and farmers about an aggregation system. The idea that if folks could collaborate and team up, they can sell more easily to institutional buyers who require consistent quality and volume. So that was a quote and a comment we heard. Marketing costs are high, and producers would like to see a shared marketing tool to reduce costs. Another one that's not noted up here is somehow that if it's a farmer cooperative that's distributing, they might be able to exert a degree of influence over pricing. I think that's kind of a complicated goal, but that was a sentiment shared at the time. And maybe there was this notion, and this is kind of pre-COVID, and that kind of changed things, but that some of the access to farmers markets and direct consumer sales were maybe contracting just a bit. People were a little bit concerned as to whether that was kind of plateauing. Do we need to take the 3% of food sales that have been typically restricted for local sales and somehow expand that? It's sort of a glass ceiling to break through, that we need to boost that 3% that local food sales have been at to 4 or 5 and somehow increase it. And if we can aggregate, can we get into some more schools, more institutional buyers, restaurants that are not necessarily in the choir, and bring them into the choir, but somehow expand that overall network, and maybe even create opportunities for new growers coming in to build their business plans in a different way than they had been. Maybe if they'd been focused on box sales and farmers markets before, could they build kind of a mid-tier wholesale market as a new business model and create some more opportunities? So we were very fortunate when NABC expanded their services to the south, because there's a lot of the doing part of establishing a co-op that frankly WSU or an Economic Development Council just are not equipped to do, and so that partnership has proved to be a really great combination. And I only bring it up because I think you need to have a really well-rounded team with a lot of players to be kind of successful to take on, like, we're going to start a new organization, and we're going to write bylaws, and we're going to write policy. And that is, there's a ton of work and a ton of meetings in that. So the partnership has been key. I just showed this slide just because a lot of the feedback from growers at the time I came on was really focused on kind of this market access, whether physical infrastructure like vans or social infrastructure like relationships and online sales platforms. That was an area where a lot of people were seeing a need for support. So as Mike mentioned, we went out for this local food promotion program grant through USDA. These were a few of the meeting objectives that were hatched along the way. This would have been, I think, early to I guess early 2019 at the time. And so a formal group and a charter was envisioned, and so we proposed that. An evaluation of what the sales opportunity and market potential is, obviously a key piece to setting this up. And then what I'll call a bunch of the functional pieces, and I kind of alluded to those a moment ago, but growers' guides, application forms, policies, organizational structures, actually writing the bylaws, figuring out where that co-op should be established, who should be in it, what kind of co-op. And then a lot of the nuts and bolts, safety, operations, SOPs, training on, and then also trying to implement. But at the time, keep in mind, this is a planning grant, and we'll kind of describe the evolution of that. Certainly, the development of business plan is something that NABC is also really well suited for. I work for WSU, but I love talking about how wonderful it is to work with NABC, just because you can never have, a successful project, like I've said, without good partners. And then doing what we're doing today, which is getting the word out and trying to share the lumps we've taken along the way in working on this. You want to start in on this one and chat a little bit about our starting point?
Yeah,
Cool.
I'd love to. Thank you, Stephen. Again, Stephen and I actually started the work prior to getting the grant. Most of the grant was written in my pickup on our way down to another conference in Vancouver over the course of about an hour and a half drive. And we had already started to have producer outreach meetings. And so we went to several counties. We're serving a 5-county region. Each one is a bit unique. Stephen and I took our show on the road. We used some NABC templates. We highlighted NABC's history in the development of the Puget Sound Food Hub, really to introduce and convey concept to growers in all of these individual counties. This culminated in a panel discussion where we brought in growers and some staff from the Puget Sound Food Hub to ask, so that the potential membership could start to ask some questions and get their questions answered in real time.
Mm-hmm. Here's a bit of a summary of some of the early feedback. We had some interactive meetings in Grace Harbors County, Pierce County, Thurston County, Lewis County. This is kind of in the winter of 2019, around December. And just documented what people's interests were in starting this. Do you have unmet market needs? This is a chart just showing a distribution of the different farm size. You can see that we have 29 producers in that 0 to 5 range, 9 producers in this over 50 range. And then the hashed line illustrates sort of the size, the total acreage in all farms that fall in that category. So a few number of farms with a lot of acreage, pretty typical of our, kind of production demographics, I guess, in Washington. Quite a few farms representing a bit less acreage. So this is just who we were able to attract to the meetings. I think in total we talked with about 55 folks growing on about 875, 900 acres of ground, and just asked them practical questions like, how far would you drive? Are you interested in this? Do you need market access? What kind of support would be most helpful? We have this theme kind of throughout the presentation of this kind of aha, uh-oh. We had a lot of ahas along the way. We had quite a few uh-ohs. Maybe, I don't know which we've had more of, probably about the same. So that's the light bulb, it's kind of the aha. And people were interested, that's why it's an aha. These were really fun times kind of gathering input from folks. This is the type of production that those growers were involved in. Kind of pretty evenly distributed across produce, processed products, meat, plants, fruit. So pretty diverse population, people pretty involved broadly in what they might want to sell through the food hub. So that felt good. We asked a really basic question about this kind of, do you have a market access needs? Just to gauge a sense of, how urgent is this for you? Why did you show up to this meeting? Will you show up again? Essentially. So, and so starting to, form relationships and kind of get out on the street. This is Aslan Mead, our partner at the Thurston Economic Development Council. Aslan's a real networker. So he's been a great partner along the way. With the first sort of theme, some of this presentation is kind of broken into themes. This is one of the themes we're going to start to linger on for a little bit: production, sales, and demand. These are kind of so as we get launched on this local food production plan grant, we start to do outreach in the community to growers, obviously, like we've been mentioning, and then to buyers as well, of course. So this is all still pretty theoretical. It's early in 2020. We haven't really locked, well, let's see, what's going on in 2020 at this point? I feel like we haven't really were we fully locked down? It's so hard for me to remember. We were still having our grower meetings, but was that in the beginning of 2019?
No, I'm thinking early 2020 is when
Okay.
this all shifted, and we were
Right.
having conversations like, is this for real? Is this
Yeah.
a media
So we haven't hit
hype?
there yet. Whether I'm delusional or not, we haven't hit the full lockdown yet. So we're going to do networking events. We're going to bring growers in. And this is sort of what we started hearing, is that the pros were that people were interested. We had a lot of core partnerships with institutional buyers, St. Martin's, Evergreen, hospitals, restaurants. And they wanted to get access to new markets. And so that was all looking really promising. As things proceeded, and even as we started to get into the time when we couldn't kind of have in-person events, there was a shift. Obviously, retail sales from restaurants were declining. Food services and institutional buyers didn't have kids on campus, didn't have state workers. We're in Olympia, so having that access to state offices and their cafeterias could have been a really good partnership. So those kind of started declining. And we just started having a little bit more real conversations about pricing and what our buyers would really commit to from our growers. And so we're starting to get sort of a bit of a reality check around that. So that's kind of on the side of the ledger. But nevertheless, throughout the year in 2020, we're doing a lot of outreach, a lot of conversations, a lot of meetings, trying to get a sense of what this market landscape would look like for a fledgling food hub. So this just kind of like, this figure shows this sort of distribution from like things are working pretty well right now for what this group of growers is trying to do, and things that are a little more yellow light, red light, or neutral. So, clearly a lot of our ideas around connecting with restaurants, people were still theoretically interested, but of course menus are so shrunk from, pre-pandemic levels. The opportunity to really bring in a lot of product was limited, and new product. So, and the ability to commit was also somewhat limited. So enthusiasm, but a little lukewarm. Institutional buyers, a lot of those core accounts that we thought would maybe be the launch pad, what we kind of considered as like anchor buyers, they just weren't able to deliver. They'd deliver for a little while, and then they couldn't kind of carry through and be consistent from month to month. So we haven't really fully launched yet. We're still trying to get commitments, and we'll talk about kind of how that we pivoted into a launch. And that kind of gets down to the bottom of the food aid. Obviously, big supply chain issues, as we all know. There starts to be relief programs to get food to people who are in need, help displaced workers, help farmers replace accounts that were lost. And so we had a funding line that came through, and I'll talk about that in a little bit in food aid. I do mention, second from the bottom, an area where sort of aside from food aid accounts where the hub started to be successful, which was looking for areas that growers weren't already populating that space. So some winter multi-farm boxes turned out to be kind of a promising area between 2020 to 2021. But this is what the landscape has looked like. I think it's changing constantly, as you all know, in terms of your abilities to reach out to, sustain the markets you have, change markets, and kind of respond. So we did did a little bit of footwork in the last year. This is kind of a little bit of the wonky stage of the presentation. Did some survey work, reached out to buyers in multiple counties, ended up launching a survey that was reached just about, a little over 1,500 households. And we were asking people about their willingness to purchase, what kind of products they'd be most interested in. And what we were working on a lot here in the planning phases with the hub was, how do you want to specialize? Is this going to be an organization that's focused on wholesale entirely? Is there going to be a focus on wholesale plus consumer direct? Is this going to involve consumer direct delivery to the doorstep? Is it a drop point? What's going to be the market strategy for this organization and this group of producers? So a lot of soul searching during this time. And some interesting little bright windows. And one of those has to do with a little pocket out in Pacific County. And I'll just let kind of Mike speak to that a bit if I can take a pause.
Yeah, I do want to emphasize what Stephen had mentioned and may have slipped by. So, it's really, I think, development of this food hub and development of aggregation marketing services in general, like, you're looking for the value proposition to the producer, right? And so we entered into this project with the value proposition being like, we have a potential solution to the perception that retail sales are plateauing or declining. And almost overnight, we went from direct sales economic environment where people were struggling to retain CSA members and were witnessing a decline in farmers market sales to waiting lists on CSAs, and it really a rekindled interest and almost like a critical necessity for people to buy food locally. There was a lot of mistrust around the food chain, so or food distribution, especially with the established players. And so that value proposition went out the window immediately. And what we quickly recognized was there was a lot of opportunity in food access. Food access, food pantries saw a huge uptick in participation. I think my numbers will be wrong, but close, like a 70% uptick in participation, and 40% of that 70% were first-time clients. And so our value proposition quickly became the fact that we had an established partnership between WSU, NABC, and the Thurston EDC, and we had an administrative capacity to navigate some of these more complex contractual agreements. And so that was a big part of pivoting from our original intention to how we delivered in terms of implementation. Stephen's right to point out Pacific County. So enter Pacific Mountain Workforce Development Council. And they had received a large grant in support of individuals that had lost employment as a result of COVID-19. And part of that was providing not only food, which we had to refer to as training materials, but also instruction on how to cook that food, how to prepare it, how to preserve it. And so we formed a partnership with them. Pacific County, if you're familiar, is a county of persistent poverty located in southwest Washington. It runs from sort of like Grays River around the Long Beach Peninsula east along the Columbia. And so despite the fact that it was pretty far away, we had a lot of willing participants in that area. And so it was really the perfect acid test in terms of our implementation. So we got to struggle through the logistics of developing a program in collaboration with the Pacific Mountain Workforce Council and start to deliver products, start to make some producer payments, start to purchase some product. Ow, what's up, brother? And get it on the street.
Yeah, and so it was an interesting relationship. I'll mention as a comparison that during this time, Link Food Hub, operating out of Spokane, kind of made a similar transition. Focus on wholesale, food aid contracts are available, a little bit more consumer direct. And so we're kind of feeling our way through the dark with the producers we have in terms of like, is this a population of big producers that can do volume? Is this a population of small producers that need high price points? Like, what's our asset? What can we do that's going to fit? And I would say we're still figuring that out. And I think we're going to get to more kind of discussion of that. But we started to see some neat pockets of interest in rural areas among populations that just don't have access to local, high-quality, fresh produce. And people willing to pay in some kind of unexpected areas, like little pockets out in Pacific County. And to this day, they are very committed and wanting. We've had to kind of push pause for a bit, but populations that want to restart as soon as the product is flowing again. So just want to shout out Marilyn Siddiker helped implement this survey. She's a kind of a research technical assistance provider on the project. What this is, I just put this chart up because, it just kind of illustrates there's some interest in some, CSA style multi-farm boxes in rural populations. And those are the folks we were sort of reaching out to. And just pretty even distribution of what people would like to see in their product if we were doing drops in different parts of this 5-county region. So everything from fruit and vegetables, which kind of top the chart on the bottom. It's hard to read this chart, but the blue is is products that people are more interested in. But also meat and dairy and eggs, so anything that folks can get access to. And this is kind of like pivot to full on like uh-oh mode with COVID. It's going to change the way this whole project is going to operate. To the extent to which we can meet as producers. It's obviously, as we've talked about, changing the market landscape for the growers that we're working with and the growers region-wide. So, a lot of people are feeling like at this time, this was a UW, WSU survey kind of early in the pandemic, so kind of forecasting what people thought might happen. There's a lot of unknowns around how those market impacts are going to play out. But half of producers across the state with sales of $10,000 to $99,000 are kind of concerned about some potential market loss that they're going to be experiencing. Just among those top 5 COVID-related challenges they're facing, closed markets, distribution, and sales channels were, kind of topping that chart with other potential cash flow issues because of, increased expenses or decreased revenue of one kind or another. And then some percent of Washington farmers who have lost revenue in different markets. So on-farm sales, people were thinking they were going to be losing in farmers markets and restaurants. So, a little bit of a different landscape here. Right at midstream as we're trying to kind of form this organization. But this is kind of that aha that Mike's starting to talk about in terms of COVID. These are opportunities, they're highly unfortunate circumstances, but in some unforeseen ways kind of creating a space that a kind of a nascent fledgling hub could operate in. So employment's upended during this time. Farms are reacting quickly to locate new farmers and get products delivered. There's funding available to connect dislocated workers to the food system through these kind of worker displacement programs and opportunities to train folks. So Mike's talking about how food starts to be perceived as a training material. In what we mean by that is that we had an opportunity to get funding through Pac Mountain Workforce Development to help people retrain for jobs in the food industry, whether in culinary or whatever it may be. And so this funding line came down through federal funding, and this program was launched, and we had the opportunity to work, as we've mentioned, with Pac Mountain, and it was certainly the first time I've worked that closely with our workforce development partners, but this is an amazing partnership. I think the learning went both ways. They learned that they can get funding to actually do things such as putting workers on farms, working at farmers markets, and we found that we could put drivers in seats and drivers in warehouse positions using what are called these WEX positions. So I think this is going to be a really fruitful relationship going forward. You want to say any more?
No, I really don't. Other than it was like a quadruple bottom line, and not only did it really help people on a practical level. But in terms of the early membership for the producers of the Food Hub to understand that, not only were we purchasing and reselling their product, but we were also providing gainful employ to people displaced by COVID. It was just a very impactful process.
And Heidi has a question. Heidi.
The Pacific Mountain Workforce Council operates in 5 counties, and so without naming them, they closely matched our service area at the time. And so we were able to, for example, our driver, because Pacific County was our furthest delivery point, we found a driver located in Pacific County that would rent a van in the morning, drive into the Tumwater warehouse, and then assemble boxes, take them back to Pacific County that evening, and return the van.
So they got funding much more than this food hub even saw. They got, I think, $700,000, and we're placing positions all over that 5-county region, of which we just got a few, which was awesome. And then this regional food security project contributed $50,000 to do this kind of soft launch. Am I going backwards or forwards here? I think going forwards, yeah. To do this soft launch. And so what we had a number of long meetings about whether the Food Hub wanted to take Pac Mountain up on this contract that they were putting on the table, which was if you can deliver food to 100 families with displaced workers, we have $50,000 to fund that. And you're putting together the infrastructure pieces in the way of vans and drop points. So we'd love to partner with you. And so, you know, short story or long story short, the hub decided to do that. And this is kind of us pulling out, you know, like where our energy then began to focus in the next, you know, 5-6 months. So this is like, you know, April, May, June, July, whatever. We're making this decision. And so obviously really focused on those functional pieces, right? Like getting the nuts and bolts of growers' guides and forms and policies and logistics and safety plans in place. And I won't linger much on this kind of I've called out around sales and production planning, but there's probably, you know, at one time or another, you have to sink your energy in forming an organization into one place, and you're going to have to circle back around later on. So all our eggs went into the basket of getting this thing started, focusing on these food aid dollars. But in the meantime, we weren't focused as much on other non-food aid accounts. And that's where the hub, you know, honestly is trying to now backfill on those relationships. So there's a little but you know, you can never kind of do everything all at once. This is the McMaster family, one of our early food hub members, and been, you know, real pleasure to work with. So we moved into this area of planning phase and doing a lot of Zoom meetings and building up a committee that would be suited to kind of make the decisions around how to launch this thing. Any comments in this one?
I don't think so, but I will draw your attention to the fact that not only did Pack Mountain provide the Southwest Washington food hub with WEX positions, which were basically warehouse and delivery positions, but also one administrative position, which we plugged in as the interim general manager of the food hub as it moved forward.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about the opportunity through these food aid grants. I think the only kind of here was that, you know, this was not the same environment we envisioned operating in. It was really difficult to do, obviously, or impossible to do in-person events. So our world became really narrowed down during this time. Doing really fun buyer producer networking events, like having little galas in town to get people excited about buying from different farmers. None of that was possible. So we got a little, myopic out of necessity to launch this. And so, and it's tiring, we had week after week of, evening Zoom meetings, after long days of work. So it was an interesting time, but had its difficulties. But this is some of the work that we were able to put on the ground. So we've affectionately started calling this phase of the planning grant sort of the learn by doing approach. Got a warehouse donated by the Port of Olympia. That's what's pictured here. This is a WEX hire here shown in the photo, doing some packing of boxes. So able to set up that distribution warehouse. And yeah, Mike, you want to talk about any of these good, fun nuts and bolts that you did a lot of work on?
Yeah, no, I think you're really doing a great job. And I think you've done a brilliant job. It really was. Yeah, I can't stress enough how difficult it was to do all this work in a whole new, in the new apocalypse, where it was a majority of it. Farmers are. I mean, we had to, all of a sudden enter Google Docs into people's world, right? Not only were we trying to get a fledgling business off the ground, at the same time, we were trying to provide enough technical assistance to get some of our producers to be able to navigate a Zoom meeting or share documents, heaven forbid, third-party project management software. So, really just at least specific to this project, and I'm sure many others that you're experiencing, there was that a whole new level of complexity layered on top of everything else.
But so yeah, this was a fun time to be able to get on the ground. So that was really refreshing. Mike did a lot of work with that manager, getting systems in place for pick lists, for producer outreach, for making sure that we had pre-trip, safety checklists and vans. A lot of stuff that would be hard to do theoretically in planning meetings. So that hence the learn by doing. It was great to have that space. Mike dragged out a bunch of old rollers from one of their warehouses, because he not only wears an NABC hat but a producer hat. So able to set up the warehouse with a set of rollers, pack boxes, bringing people to pseudo volunteer, at least some of our membership, And so this was a pretty cool time and pretty fun work last, whenever it was. I've lost track of time. And then, getting some good donations too from the community. We're able to get a community foundation grant to help, purchase a bit of infrastructure, able to pull down a grant to buy a van that was kind of CARES Act related resources. And then put up this distribution system, right? Like figuring out like where are we going to go, who's going to be the drop site, forming relationships out in Aberdeen, down in South Bend, Washington, areas that we'd probably never be able to go to get that far out. They're probably not cost effective, but at the time it was a good relationship building and like kind of just proving out like the kinks in our system and how it works.
Yeah, that is basically the sum total of our initial operating plan.
So that was fun.
The diagram on the right.
And that was a light bulb. That was an aha. So that worked pretty well. Mike, do you want to talk about policy organizational development?
I will touch on that a little bit. It was delightful to be able to contribute to the development of the cooperative in general, have that legal entity for the food hub to land. The food hub operates as a pool within the cooperative. So there's the food hub, and then there's also a grain pool. Very different sets of farmers, and I'm impassioned about the potential moving forward there. By comparison, the grain is a commodities crop. It doesn't require a lot of policy, where the food hub is a significantly more complex business model. So there's, a lot of work has gone into initially getting enough policy on the ground that we could, for example, we had a stated markup for product and some very, very simple, very streamlined safety protocols and quality protocols. It's probably the most important work that isn't finished. That, and I think work around developing a strong mission for the food hub. I think it really, these are works in progress. I think policy, a good policy is a living document, but I want to just stress the importance, I think, too, of developing a good mission moving forward with this, so everybody's clear about why they're there at the end of the day. So not to carry the banner of cooperative formation too much, but a lot of that work is part and parcel of cooperative development. Even if you were to form an LLC or S-Corp around a project like this, I think a strong mission is critical moving forward. We've had a lot of community engagement in the past year, and we're actually at this point, we're starting to see some turnover in that. So, specific to this project, I think we're at a real turning point in terms of membership engagement. We're probably going to see a little bit of turnover in our committees and some new policy written this winter to further define how we operate.
Yeah, and a nice point around that is the importance of good facilitation and outside facilitation. There comes a point where, Mike and I and Asin are sort of too close to the process. We're grading on people's nerves; they're grading on our nerves. Mike's been great about bringing in, some professional consultancy. So we've been working with Holly O'Neill at Crossroads, and that's kind of, we're working on that still. So like clarifying roles, everybody can't do everything. Everybody doesn't have authority. That those things don't work. Figuring out where we should really be getting input from the producer committee. Clarifying their sense of the philosophy around pricing and sales volumes and market strategies. So a lot of that work kind of is still continuing because it's easy to operate in a food aid environment in a way in which you don't have to kind of fully respond to market signals. So now we're getting more into a world where this hub's got to respond to market signals in terms of pricing alignment with what the market can bear. So, that's the direction we're moving in. This is more gorgeous than it may even look from the outside, but this is kind of what I've learned is what an organizational chart, should look like in terms of some pretty clear pathways that authorizes one person at the top to kind of make decisions and have one person they're reporting to. This is 2 pools. This is a lot of fine print, but the co-op, as Mike has said, consists of 2 different pools, a grain pool and a food hub pool. So the food hub pool is over on the right, and ideally we don't have this person hired, but there'd be a manager here. They'd report directly to the interim general manager up here. And then these are like, these entities have influence, but not a lot of decision making, or they are more strategic and not tactical. Do you want to say any more? Well, I'll finish that thought. So our food hub committee is kind of off to the side. They're not hiring, firing, and making day-to-day decisions, but it's easy for them to get into that habit of making. It's not to diminish the importance of the producers, but it's to make the organization effective at operating.
Yeah, I think I would just be redundant, but I guess I want to underline and bold Stephen's comment around, we're now referring to ourselves, Stephen Aslan and myself, as a technical advisory team. And there was a time when this was really, we felt we didn't really have to ask anyone. We just got to do, and that's shifting now. And because of our proximity to the project, it was necessary to bring someone else in. Could we have done the work of a third-party consultant on our own? Probably, except no, not at all, because again, we've just been there for too long. And so just getting someone with that objective point of view to come in that the membership and us have not done a lot of work with, when they say something, we tend to listen. I would imagine that Puget Sound Food Hub would probably echo that sentiment.
Yeah, so don't ever underestimate the value of a good organizational chart. It's not just wonky material. It carries a lot of meaning in terms of how the organization actually runs. I was always kind of like, Mike, why do we need to do this food hub chart stuff? And no, he was right. You need to have a good flow of decision making. Kind of pivoting a little bit in the last, say, 15, 20 minutes, I think we'll be able to talk a bit about the finances and the business aspects of running the food hub. So I'll just kind of give an intro and then kind of turn it over to Mike. He's done a lot of the heavy lifting on the bookkeeping, setting up chart of accounts, setting up processes for tracking sales data. This is just the culmination of the first years of experience, and we're calling a year from June 30th, 2020 to July 1st, 2021. So just that time period represents pretty much the time frame in which the hub was operating, and had a couple different lines of revenue. And so this is a kind of probably an anomalous sort of year one experience. I think it's easy to get over optimistic about these sales. This is a pretty big sales year for a year one, and that's because we had these kind of sweetheart deals with Food Aid, and are sort of transitioning out of that. But it was an awesome opportunity to kind of get a sense of what the expenses are. So starting from ground zero, I wouldn't have been able to, obviously none of us would be able to kind of have a great sense of how some of those costs would break down. So we got a year of doing to kind of document that, and maybe that's what it'll give us a guide going forward.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I would add except the story of the summer when I was 15 and spent it by my friend's in-ground pool, and every day at 5 o'clock his father would come home from work and be like, what have you two bomb throwers been doing all day? And that was kind of like, I felt like him talking to the food hub around a lot of these numbers all of the time. Like, yeah, this is incredible that we're doing this work, but this is what looks like going forward, and this contract is going to end at this certain point. Frankly, I'm really proud of the work that the Food Hub has been able to do, and I think moving forward, the numbers indicate. I had the pleasure of developing the business plan for the Food Hub, and feel uniquely. I felt a little bit alone in the most valuable part of a business plan, in my assessment, is developing the plan itself, because you really look under the hood and you turn over every rock, and you really try to identify the weaknesses and the strengths of an organization. The presentation of a business plan is enormously valuable in as much as it can be implemented, but the process of going through that, it's been a delight to work with Stephen, because he's a very curious individual, wants to understand where these numbers came from, for example. And happy to talk your ear off around the numbers.
And what's missing.
Specifically, pardon me?
And what's missing from this?
and what's missing. But really, I don't know that I have anything relevant to add. I think it's, one thing about, another thing about cooperatives is that there is cooperation among cooperatives. So I know that the Southwest Washington Growers Co-op feels beholden to share this information where it can be valuable in the development of other like projects.
Well, and what is not on here is some of those WEX positions
Right.
during this time. And so something I've learned is some of the margins that you look for in terms of profitability at, variable margin and net income, what you're looking for in terms of that percentage of income over revenue. And we would be nowhere near, Mike's benchmarks for hitting that if we were including the cost of labor.
Yeah, and what I've been doing with the books is I actually add in, or I've been, dad's home, requiring people to estimate the number of hours that are going into this, not only from an on-the-ground delivery driver position, but also from an administrative position. I track my hours loosely that I dedicate directly to this project, and there, in my spreadsheets, you would notice that the labor is included at market rate and then subtracted at the bottom under headings which I refer to as extraordinary income to help provide a more meaningful budget moving forward.
Yeah, so those are, we have the revenue of grants on here, but we don't have, so it turns out pretty good by the bottom line at, making $60,000. Overall sales is, 105. The majority of that, well, I don't know, the majority, half of it, I guess, was through that food aid.
Yeah,
And
easily.
And there was a handful of other revenue lines, some through what was adopted as an online platform, which we used, Local Food Marketplace. Had a pretty successful winter multi-farm CSA, multi-farm box program last winter. Kind of dabbled in what was called a gourmet food box to get a lot of value-added products in the spring, early summer of this year. But then had great contributions from the community. Those are called out here in other income. So we had the CARES funding was really that. Actually, that was separate. That was for the van. Community Foundation shipped in to help with buying infrastructure. You'll start to see, I think maybe this is kind of the next point here, like what does 4 years out look like for this organization in terms of what kind of sales would be necessary to really cover costs and reach break even? Because that last budget showed, being well above the board, but only because there was no labor and there was a lot of extra other income from that kind of community contributions. So this shows sales objectives through 2023.
Yeah, one thing I might add too is, Stephen points out the community contribution. If you want to back up on that slide just really quickly, you'll also notice under the membership fees, that's $4,700. That's really no chump change relative to total sales. And another thing you don't see here is any sort of an equity raise on the part of the membership, which is something I'm really interested in, developing mechanisms by which the membership itself can provide some of that early equity. So these are expensive propositions to get off the ground initially, especially if you're looking at the purchase of infrastructure in the way of box trucks and refrigeration, I think, are the kind of low-hanging fruit everybody identifies. So just know that one of the early consensus comments from the membership was that they don't want to be a heavily subsidized operation, and I don't know how else to do it, frankly, especially in that first 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, and even more. There's no rent right now. This is a warehouse donated also by the Port of Olympia, and that continues. I'm going to say something and forgot. What other key points on here? Any questions on this as you're looking at it? We might as well. Yeah, great.
Yeah, you might not want to answer this, Mike, but do you have a sense for what the labor costs were in that fiscal year that you included extra?
Yeah, yes, I do actually. I've got those numbers if you're interested. Actually, I have them with me.
What would you
yeah.
say? Two full-time, 2.5? I mean, ballpark?
Well, I was counting admin at like $24,000 a year, and I think I had, I mean, and that's like overall admin outside of staff, and then we had one administrative staff, which I roughed. We were lucky enough to get someone in. I valued them at 42.5, which I think is a little substandard, and then two, like operational staff positions. And I plugged those numbers in at 17 an hour, but we all know that, you would take those numbers and multiply by 1.29, 1.33 to get an accurate number. So I do have some I have some pretty accurate numbers around that, and I can't recall that total number with sufficient clarity.
And the key piece is there, for every dollar, the hub only gets 23 cents, right? If that's your percent markup. So, the biggest variable cost here is $64,000 out of $105,000 in sales. So the hub's revenue is only $35,000. You might make $105,000 in sales, but actually the hub as an entity is making $35,000 in sales. So out of all this work, they just made $35,000 and had, an employee at 24K and 2 part-times, and pretty soon you're, $50,000 underwater. I don't know. That's a wild guess, but you'd come out under at that point. So, I mean, that informs, in my amateur, economist understanding, informs everything about, the volumes that have to be moved through the organization and where it needs to get, and why the next slide shows pretty aggressive sales increases over the next 3 years. And it also, I'll show a slide. I won't even give a spoiler. So you'll see another dynamic that is, that I found interesting coming up here. So that's a key piece to recognize. Those producer payments, that's the hub's primary customer. They're trying to make, they're trying to position their farmers to make more sales. So that's obviously their biggest sort of client, so to speak. Anyway, you can ask more questions as we go. Don't hesitate to raise your hand. But then this gets into some of the projections that frankly, Mike, laid out in the coming 3 to 6 years.
Yeah, and this harkens back immediately to the production conversation that Stephen introduced earlier. In building out the business plan, if you make widgets, you just make more widgets. You buy more raw materials, you make more widgets. If you're in a wholesale market or a retail market, you just purchase more product. But if your mission hobbles you in terms of where you can purchase those raw products, if you're beholden to purchase products from a regional membership, then your sales are limited to the amount of product available in production. And so I found it was a little challenging to do that. Some of it was best guess, but the business plan that I developed, the starting point was asking producers what an ideal payment looked like to them, what they could handle, what kind of volume. And I didn't want to get into details, not how many bunches of carrots, how many bunches of cilantro, how many cases of this, how many cases of that. Like, I know that you know what it takes to keep your business alive. Do you want one $500 check a week? Do you want a $1,000 check a week? And if so, can you produce that amount of product? And so these projections were based on that, along with increasing membership to increase that production base. Because what I found moving through this, and it was a bit of a scary realization, was many of our original membership were not really interested in doubling their acreage or growing or expanding. They were very happy with the market niche that they occupied, and they were just looking for increased pricing. It's not necessarily a good match for a food hub that's out there competing with the OGC and Charlie's. The price point is very different. So,
yeah, one of the uncomfortable, I think, dynamics to get used to with this hub and probably others that get established is you got to decide what your primary market is. Is it consumer directed or is it wholesale? And if it's wholesale, some of the higher price sales are going to have to ride on the coattails of the lower priced high volume sales. And so that can feel like a perversion of the morals of the organization, that you would turn the group with its objectives for supporting small scale regional ag or of multiple sizes would then be riding on hitting mainline wholesale price points with the biggest producers out there can feel like maybe their smaller and mid-sized growers aren't comfortable with that. But if you can reach those sales objectives, those small and mid-scale growers stand to benefit by new markets that are opened up. And that's a kind of a hard thing for our group. It continues to be a hard thing for this group to wrap its head around. And we heard that lesson loud and clear from Puget Sound Food Hub that says, don't worry too much about the big growers or even selling pies for that matter, or conventional pies at volume. Like that, those sales are going to carry the organization. And if that organization exists tomorrow, that's another day for everybody to make more sales. So don't get too wrapped up in it, but that can be kind of challenging, I think. But over time, notice that the sales of this organization are projected to flux from food aid into what we call these outside sales, which would be like large-scale institutional accounts mediated by a super skilled broker that we need to hire. Yeah.
Remind me again, the farms that you, what was this, because I'll talk to you guys offline, because I was wrapped up on it, Ellen, Grant, and Chuck was like, well, Scott County. How big were the farms that you initially did the outreach to? What was like, were they small, mid-size, were they big, and what does that look like in Scott County?
I think we'd call them small. Stephen may have a better memory around this, but it's difficult as I go through my Rolodex of the membership. With some few exceptions, very few, I don't know that we have any farms over 20 acres, and we have some that are under an acre.
Yeah. Right. So that's a hard population to think about those bigger operations. A little easier to think about that kind of model for Skagit County, frankly, where you can get some really competitive large-scale producers, and they can build the organization, and everybody else can kind of fill in around them. Link made a wholesale transition, and left that because they could reach break even at a lot lower total sales volume.
I will add that, we are operating right now at a 23% markup, and which is perfectly reasonable if you're bringing in a box of product, putting it in a cooler, and then putting it in a truck and delivering it. These retail sales, 23% doesn't really make it. If you're bringing a product in, repackaging, or you're bringing in something under a case count, anything that's one-off makes that 23%. I don't think it works anymore.
Yeah. We don't need to dwell on this much, but this is going to be the type of material that the hub and the technical service providers use to identify sales targets. So if you broke down any given sales category, like outside sales, how many and at what price per transaction and how many transactions per year do we need to reach to say in 2022, meet our marks, basically? How many $750 sales do we need to make monthly, for 12 months? And then we got to start to find those people that can, buy that product at that price point. So it's kind of a little internal. It's probably a little more fine-grained information than we need here. But this is the kind of work that, like, when Mike and I sit down and brainstorm out, like, what's this next? What do these numbers mean when you actually look at transactions? If you're going to try to make, $500,000, how many transactions of what type of buyer do we need to reach in the coming year to really hit that mark? And then those become the work plan for a sales manager, right? Like, they got to get out there and start hitting the street and drumming up those sales. That make sense?
That does.
Okay. This is interesting. This is some good USDA publications. This is a projection that USDA put out on their 4-part Food Hub sort of informational publication series. This is number 3, assessing the financial viability of a food hub. This is the difference in break even between a wholesale and a consumer direct food hub. So Mike's charted out a course for pretty much largely a wholesale operation. I think he said time to time about $2 million is maybe where break even would be. You see the difference is what you should notice, and you probably can't read, is just the big number in between those two. So break even consumer direct at $314,000 is far fewer transactions annually, or maybe it's many more smaller transactions at higher price points than 1.2 million for the wholesale to break even. So there's a fundamental philosophy difference that I think the organization needs to understand. And I'm not saying this organization does. I think we're getting there.
Yeah, it's Yeah, you can quickly see in a comparison between the wholesale and direct to consumer. If you run a farm or any other production operation, packaging is one of the biggest line items. If you're repackaging, and that will quickly eat up a significant percentage of that gross revenue. Average box cost right now is about $2.40. Check me if I'm wrong. And average case price I would estimate somewhere between 35 and 42. So a significant portion of that revenue.
And the planning time of window is pretty narrow, really, from year to year to get growers to increase their production or to find buyers for the coming year. So, I think you have to be pretty clear, and when we're coming into that time of year, thinking about what 2022 is going to look like, we have to use every week really well to line up sales. And I'm outside at the breakfast table with Heidi at Rising River Farm, or I'm sorry, Rising River Boisfort. Oh my God. Oh my. At Boisfort Farm, talking about like, what do you want to sell in the coming year? Like, who should I be talking to? What are the key products that, you could move? What did you have trouble with this year? So it's, every, this kind of time is of the essence. This is just, I think, to give you a little idea for anybody working on this, some of the funding partnerships that supported this hub in the first year. Had that USDA planning grant, 100,000, had some CARES Act funding for 30K that bought a van and a cooler. Pack Mountain provided that food aid funding to put together food aid boxes. They also supported workers, so that's kind of that 100K plus that Grant's asking about how much, if you looked at the actual value of that labor, what did it amount to? I mean, it's a sizable amount. Mike's got the numbers, but we don't have it quantified well here. The Community Foundation chipped in, and then some in-kind value from the Port of Olympia and getting some warehouse space. So good amount of external support, getting that question of like, is this, going to be an operation that supports itself? I mean, little by little, more and more, but it's going to be a long road with a lot of community support. But for every sale, that's a benefit to the producer. So the benefit starts now, but it's a long-term community investment in supporting that organization. Uh-oh, I don't know.
Well, and I just want to add again, I think that membership participation is another, not only from the community, but also from within the membership. I think that the Southwest Washington Food Hub stands to gain significantly if it can design a program by which the membership fills some of those roles, not for free, not voluntarily, but paid at a fair rate, but just the latitude of not having to pay find 40 hours worth of delivery work or 40 hours worth of warehouse work for a fledgling operation, but rather to be able to borrow from some of the membership, either within the membership itself or through their employees, I think could be a really meaningful way to move forward.
This is just a little bit of, I think this gets to be a bit of the fun part, just the last couple of wrap-up slides. When we look at the project of the last year, these are just some of the things that, I guess, milestones for us, final products. This is Heidi and Mike at Boisfort Farm down in Boisfort, Washington. Got a chartered committee together, which is, a good group. It's going to turn over. We're going to get some fresh legs going into 2022, I think. A lot of guidance documents, a lot of materials. We've got roots. We've got a good sense. I think a good example of a deliverable that we have right now is a budget that Mike just got put together recently, which is like, for any given drop that we complete, is it going to make money or lose money? I mean, it's a very simple, fundamental calculation. Is it worth starting the van or not? Those are really like useful basic tools, but it takes a long time to get to them. Certainly all the food safety and produce safety plans in place are obviously super key. And we continue to do buyer outreach, and we got a good roadmap and the business and marketing plan that Mike put together through his work with NABC. And then we'll come out with a few fact sheets for food hubs, one focused on Puget Sound Food Hub, another for this operation, Southwest Washington Food Hub, and then one for Link. So those will probably be out in the next few months. Kind of doing that comparative analysis, what strategies worked in different locations, breaking down some numbers, breaking down some different organizational tools. These are the fun and feel-good stuff from the last year. Types of people who've gotten involved along the way. I'll point out the photos along the bottom. A lot of these are associated with that food aid. At the end of the day, people who got displaced from jobs got boxes last year. And that's a huge fun part of the work so far. And we get wrapped up in the details. But they were sending in photos of meals they cooked with their kids. It's the best produce they've ever got. They're sending in, emails to our partners at Pack Mountain who are really aggregating all this feedback. Brought in 11 different cooks, made a series of videos through the SNAP Ed program, teaching people how to cook with raw produce. So that was, a lot of fun to do that kind of work. So at the end of the day, we also worked with a lot of people getting this food out into the community, and just kind of engage with a lot of folks.
Yes.
Yes, we should end so we can get questions. But Mike, don't hesitate to stop me. These are kind of our wonky kind of stats from the LFPP grant, just in terms of the number of people we accessed, sales generated, current Food Hub membership, which is dragging behind actuals, I think, at this point a little bit.
The membership?
Yeah.
We're close. We're very close.
Okay. And then, a lot of workshops. We called a lot of our planning meetings workshops, frankly, because that was a lot of what we did. It's like, let's figure out this distribution route. All right, let's figure out, how to develop a grower's guide. Great, that's a workshop on policy. So we had to stretch the imagination of like a USDA grant deliverable a little bit. But I think it worked out well. But I'd say at the end of the day, one of the things that we've suffered from is we've become a bit insulated in the community. Those training sessions were for a captive audience of 10 growers, week after week after week. So we need to get back out and bring more people in, have community meetings, do those fun galas that we always wanted to do, have producer-buyer meetings to get people excited about committing dollars for the coming season. And a lot of that stuff that we need to get back to now that we can start to get back in person with folks. So I'll skip over that one. There's a lot of partners along the way, which we just can't, say thank you enough to these different, institutions, organizations, partners at Organic Valley that shared time and wisdom. Both ports in our area shared a lot of time, and I've mentioned some of the others in the form of institutions, WSDA, Community Foundation. But we're still, back, we're still in the same place, and even more so that an organization like this is as important as ever, right? So this is the sentiment at the end of this project. Secretary Vilsack saying we've got a great productive food system, but it's prone to disruption. And, there's, hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars flowing into our states and local regions right now to try to create more resilient local food systems. So we're still trying to crack the nut with this one, and we have a long way to go, but the logic is still there, and it's stronger than ever. And the second quote down there is a school food service that obviously we know that they've been having a hard time getting food with delivery drivers not showing up or having no drivers to drive the trucks, so not able to get food out in this part of Grays Harbor County for schools from time to time. So people are going hungry, but it's not a total breakdown, but there's a lot of kind of threadbare parts of the food system, right, that we're seeing right now. And I just want to end with this because it's still, I'll call it a Joel and Goliath story. This is one of our Food Hub members. Joel and his partner Ann are great partners in the process, a lot to share. But at the end of the day, too, we're a part of a small local food system trying to enact change in a very large conventional food system, a $20 billion industry trying to affect change in a $650 billion industry. And, in certain very real ways, you run up against that reality and trying to nudge buyers or whatever it may be. So with that, we'll open up to questions, comments. And I think we're doing okay. I think the intro ran over a bit, so we maybe have, how long, Carrie? Okay, so yeah, just shy of 10 minutes if people have questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to. So the grain pool is 7 to 9. I bring the average age of that room down when I walk in there. They're generational farmers in rural counties in Southwest Washington. It's fun to watch Stephen interact because this is a group that is used to selling into a commodities market by contract, being told what they're going to be paid. In most cases, laying out, taking an operating loan, laying out all the operating expenses, and then waiting for one check in December. They have no interest in retail marketing whatsoever. It is unlikely that you will find any one of them ever at a farmer's market, except to maybe go there for Mother's Day to buy a flower basket. It's a tough sell. You know, much of what at Tilth, as I understand the organization and my personal experience in production, is really all based around capitalizing on the consumer relationship. You know the people. I mean, it's part and parcel of how we market. And that's true of the Food Hub pool, right? These are majority farmers market, CSA farms, some wholesale farms. And it's just they're very different, yet at the end of the day, they're all farmers. It's been nothing short of a paradox for me in my experience in that the commodities growers have really struggled over the years. They've pulled resources, they know one another's family, and there's very much a sense of mutual endeavor. On the part of the Food Hub, there's sometimes more fierce independence and I don't want to say competition, but I mean, if you're selling at farmers market, there's competition between your neighbors, right? I mean, we'd love to think of it as co-opetition, but there is a little bit more sense of ownership over that market niche. I'm wedded to the notion that these individuals can come together. Some of these generational farmers can begin to share some of their farming knowledge, which I've watched the farmers in my area, commodities growers, almost all. They're absolutely brilliant in moisture retention, timing. They're primarily conventional, right? And I've been organic, and I would say 98% of our Food Hub is certified organic. But the potential for an exchange of information, an exchange of ideas, and just exchange of shared experience. I'm trying hard to nudge the grain pool into taking ownership of some of their product through the processing so that they actually own and brand the malt barley and can recognize a little bit more revenue. It's just pushing rope uphill. But if we can start to have more of an exchange, and the difficulty of doing so, there are socio-political challenges to bringing these individuals together, which has never slowed me down before. But COVID, I think, too, and the idea that, you know, there's not been that exchange. You don't see the body language. You don't necessarily get a sense of community the way you do when you're in the room with people. So I think in a nutshell, I'm very hopeful that there's a lot of opportunity to bring those divergent groups of producers together for some net gain for everyone in terms of their shared experience. Mark?
Building on that, Stephen Jones at WSU Mount Vernon was really wanting to encourage increased grain production in Southwest Washington. There's so much dairy going out of business.
Yeah.
And so there's so much pasture land available for grain production. Is there an opportunity in your area for expansion?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, these guys, I joke, I always say, like, these guys are from the show me state, right? So we have 7 growers now. Well, I think we have 9, maybe 10, up from 7, up from 4. And so once these contracts are fulfilled, the grain market right now, the barley market and others, wheat, it's so volatile. Very quickly, we sold into a market with the malt barley market carries with it some very stringent spec, right, in terms of moisture, protein, thins, skin broken. When we sold our barley this year at $217.15 a metric ton, you could sell into the feed market for $240 a short ton. So if that malting barley had been turned away, the growers probably would have made more money. That's not a favorable, like, economic environment, right? But, you know, moving forward with these, the market has responded, the prices are up. So once this program begins to work and work for more growers, there's also a need for rotation crops. And I think that's an area where there's some crossover in terms of interest with diverse row crops. As the diverse row crop farms begin to grow, and suddenly you might be putting 5 or even 10 acres into a cover crop, there's very real potential to put that into a small grain, harvest it for either use for your own seed, for example, or to enter the market. That carries with it smaller equipment, maybe some shared equipment opportunities moving forward. And I think that's the biggest barrier to a food hub producer moving into the grain market is the lack of, it boils down to a combine and a grain truck.
There's a question over here I saw too.
Yeah,
Not the question. Good.
well, when we initially pieced this together, we were hoping to be able to do some sort of a hybrid model. At farms and farmers markets even were kind of going virtual or mobile. And what we envisioned was consolidating product in Tumwater, reassembling it, and then taking it out to satellite locations for pickup. What we were able to do is further simplify that model to a point where it wasn't necessary. We brought one of the things that Southwest Washington does, which I'd love to be able to continue to do, is we pick up from farms in the morning. So farmers selling into this program haven't, with very few exceptions, if you're close to the warehouse, don't do any delivery. So what was envisioned as farmers consolidating product in their community, having it picked up, brought in, and then that van returning to that same location for distribution, turned into a pickup route in the morning with a little bit of aggregation, but a majority of that model has been, material coming into Tumwater and then being dispersed on two routes, arguably 3, one small local route.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time. Feel free to check in with any other questions. Love to answer them. Know that some other good capacity here is, I'm going to call out Andrew in the red jacket with Puget Sound Food Hub. He's a good one for questions, too. So thanks a lot. Have a good day. Yeah.
So you knew that Cleo was involved in this grant, right?
Yeah, I think so. I just talked to her a week ago, and she was kind of alluding to a good amount of this work.
Yeah, and and I'm just like thinking, we're all over the 101 loop.
Yeah.
That's kind of what we're thinking about, and our conclusion was we just don't have the production capacity.
Hey, man. Yeah.
Physical space.
Yeah.
And so we're looking at soft infrastructure and micro-distribution and value chain coordination. And I would, Karen Appel.
I think it was in part because we got the WEX positions and they were pretty far flung. So like they were going to get paid, like we didn't have to worry too much about the nickels and dimes.
Yeah.
To get our value
We had a
chain
lot of people like,
up and running.
Tumwater's here, Pacific County's here.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
Like, there's a really good market
Yeah,
here.
we should definitely
but
talk
we
more
were
about it. I
already
got pretty excited.
out here, and that's
Cleo
where
was
our
talking to me
customer
about it.
was.
Now,
That
a lot
was
of what you're
50K.
doing, let me see if I
And I
understand
made
it, was
those numbers work.
there's
by-
kind of some
by
contract
adding
management,
a 10%
right? Because you can get funding through some
overhead, so,
WSDA,
like,
but they're kind of
boxes,
having to do with getting money for food
Reynolds.
banks and
Yeah,
emergency food. That's just,
So
oh, different.
that was a big
Okay.
piece of it. The other thing for us is like
Okay.
the farmers are really
So I might not know much
concentrated.
about
Most
what
of
you
them
have
are.
proposed.
Where are you
So what
from?
we did, our planning grant,
Okay, so it's a.
looking at wholesale market opportunities for small business.
Yeah, of course, man. I mean, I know what you guys are up to, and I think Yvonne has been reaching out to you guys a little bit. David works with you all the time.
Yeah, I just wanted to leave it to drop off, because I find the biggest thing I talk to the farmers is like, yeah, we drop it off there.
Yeah.
It is such like a, yeah, just like that is what is I feel like concern a lot of farmers, is it's like, I just don't like to have it, but it's about how you guys decided on pickups.
Yeah, it was just sort of like presented to me, and I made the numbers work. I mean, that's honestly what it boiled down to. I hate vans on the road, but it was a rental, so like at least I wasn't worried. Like, okay, if it breaks down, it's not my van, So then it just like I'm always looking for liability. Where's the liability? Well, you got to have a decent driver, like at least decent. Please give me somebody decent. But even then, like the WEX, the employer of record was
Pack Mountain, right? So like if they twisted up a family of four, heaven forbid, something really like game ender, happened, I wasn't responsible for that either. So it's not, like with a few of these things, it's hardly fair to really use that